Watch this.
If you are looking for evidence of extremism ramping up across the Northwest and in Idaho, look no further than what happened in Coeur d'Alene this weekend. A planned riot at a pride event? Police and policy experts aren't surprised. So the property value assessments went out a couple of weeks ago. This week comes the property tax assessments. And that has a lot of people concerned and still a bit confused about what that big jump in value means out of pocket. You could actually see your tax bill go down. We've heard of the end-of-life celebrations, but how about the end-of-life conversations? That's what's on the table at Boise's Death Café, along with some tea and cake. How organizers are trying to help people make the most of their lives by facing the reality of death. So, of course, we're going to talk about it today. I mean, how can we not? 31 members of the white nationalist hate group Patriot Front were arrested over the weekend in Coeur d'Alene. They were there to start a riot during a pride event. A Coeur d'Alene resident apparently saw what they described as a small army. Lots of people dressed the same with arm patches and logos on their hats, climbing into the back of a rented U-Haul van parked in a hotel parking lot. Well, after getting that tip, Coeur d'Alene police stopped the van about a quarter mile from their destination, McEwen Park. The same place there happened to be a pride event happening. Well, they slid open the back of the van very carefully and, well, outspilled the contents. More than 24. And those arrested came from 13 states. From as far away as Texas and Arkansas and Alabama, and from as nearby as Washington and Wyoming and Oregon and Utah and, yes, Idaho. 2 of them that we know about were from Idaho. 21-year-old Winston Worth Durham of Genesee, 21-year-old Richard Jacob Jessup of Idaho Falls there in the center. Then also in that U-Haul van, the apparent leader of Patriot Front. That'd be Thomas Ryan Rousseau, all of 23 years old. Patriot Front, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, is a white nationalist hate group with its origins in the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, back in 2017. Remember that? Remember the tiki torch marching, the Jews will not replace us chanting? The gathering which ended with a man driving a car into a group of counter-protesters, killing Heather Heyer. The Anti-Defamation League says Patriot Front is a white supremacist group who believes America belongs to them and them only, as in white European lineage. To them, patriotism means white supremacy, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, and fascism. So that's the kind of ilk we're talking about in North Idaho. All 31 bailed out of jail and face misdemeanor charges of conspiring to riot. Coeur d'Alene Chief of Police Lee White reiterated today what he said after the arrests. Saturday would have been a much different day if it weren't for that one phone call.
One concerned citizen can prevent something horrible from happening. This one concerned citizen, rather than pulling out their phone and videotaping this for their 15 minutes on YouTube or Snapchatting it or something like that, took the time to call 911 and report some suspicious activity. And as a result, we likely stopped a riot from happening downtown. I think some of us were a bit surprised by not only the level of preparation that we saw, but the equipment that was carried and worn by those individuals, along with the large amount of equipment that was left in the van when the stop happened. That level of preparation is not something you see every day. It was very clear to us immediately that this was a riotous group.
All right, speaking of some of that equipment, Chief White said they found riot gear in the van, including a smoke grenade, written plans, of course, which supported their charges of conspiracy to riot. But, of course, in this day and age, Chief White also took time to address the conspiracy theorists that all popped up and that always seem to pop up after incidents like this, that this was a staged event filled with actors or even federal agents.
Let me be very, very clear. Let me be very clear here. These were not law enforcement officers that we arrested. These were members of the hate group Patriot Front. These were not Antifa in disguise, nor were they FBI members in disguise.
And of course, that hasn't stopped extremists in this state from discounting what happened or what could have happened in Coeur d'Alene. Some have asked, all right, why were the police so well prepared to handle the situation? Like they knew it was coming. Plenty of officers were on hand wearing the appropriate gear. Well, here's Chief White explaining why.
We had some information that there might be some individuals who are loosely affiliated with some of the groups who were planning to protest the Pride event that day, and so we were adequately staffed for it. Anytime you have an event like this, there's opposing groups who decide to make some threats. We were taking each of those threats, not only on its face, but also we take them seriously, even though some of them appeared to be just anonymous internet stuff. So we staffed the event appropriately.
So you heard that. Not all of it was anonymous internet stuff, as you can see. So how did we get here? That's the question. Idaho is supposed to be a state that's too great for hate, right? Not according to Idaho legislators who denied printing that phrase on an Idaho license plate a couple of years ago. So that seems like a great place to start when it comes to how did we get here. And speaking of the not so anonymous internet stuff, one of those legislators is Representative Heather Scott from Blanchard in North Idaho. Back in April, in the same speaking engagement where she was talking about alleged pornography in libraries being forced onto children, she invited two guys to the podium who are members of the motorcycle group known as the Panhandle Patriots Riding Club. They were there to talk about the Pride event coming up on June 11th.
So this is a group from Coeur d'Alene, Kootenai County, and they want a couple minutes to just share.
We are having an event the very same day. That very same day, we actually intend to go head to head with these people. A line must be drawn in the sand. Good people need to stand up. As she was talking about the repercussions, we say, damn the repercussions. Stand up, take it to the head, go to the fight. They are trying to take your children. This fight is not just paper. It's not just words, it's not just politicians. They have to see people standing in their face saying, no more.
Thank you. Where's that at? McCurran Park.
Okay, so they had plans there to be there and to take it to the head, as they said. No, they weren't necessarily inviting people to join a riot. That is true. But Representative Scott wasn't exactly diffusing the situation either, reminding them of the time and place, as you just heard. She also didn't remind people that if they weren't fans of Pride events, just don't go. Nor does she take the time to defend the Pride group's right to assemble and hold an event in a public park, only that they also must be confronted. We reached out to Representative Scott today to ask about that meeting last month in Sandpoint and what happened this weekend in Coeur d'Alene, but she didn't answer the phone, nor did she answer the text message that we sent her. But what was said by those bikers back in April pales in comparison to what was said last month by a pastor at a Boise Baptist church about how anyone associated with Pride events, specifically members of the LGBTQ+ community, how he believes the Bible tells him we should deal with them.
Let me tell you something, pal. It's your fault that these pedophiles are around. It's not God's fault. He told nations how to deal with that. He told the government of his own nation, the nation that he ruled, put them to death. Put all queers to death. They die. And you know what? When they die, that stops the pedophilia. Okay? It's a very, very simple process.
Of course, pedophilia is not the same thing as homosexuality, but that didn't matter to him. He went on to say if the system wasn't working properly, it'd be like a funnel process. We'd find out who they are, the homosexuals, we'd report them to authorities, and then they send them, apparently, to hell. That's how it's supposed to work, he says, according to Pastor Joe Jones, the real Gestapo-type stuff. We did reach out to the good pastor as well to ask him about this sermon. We've yet to hear back from him. So what happened in Coeur d'Alene this weekend? Not much of a surprise, as you can imagine. I mean, we just kind of laid out kind of the rhetoric that's been happening in this state alone just in the last couple of months, but It's been building up for a long time. The Western States Center observes, you talked to somebody today, Joe, at the Western Center that has been monitoring this across the Northwest for quite some time.
Well, and it's not just what happened over the weekend, as we just showed. This has been brewing for some time in the state of Idaho and in the Northwest. And there are national groups and international groups that study hate and bigot groups and kind of what makes them operate. Why do they do the way they do? And there's a group here in the Northwest out of Portland. They're called the Western States Center. And their job is to observe and research inclusive democratic movements and societies that are rooted in justice and equity. And a big part of that is tracking extremist groups like those that planned on harming the Pride event in Coeur d'Alene. Today, I spoke with Kate Bitts, who is a program manager at the Western States Center, and she spends her time working with communities to help them organize against white nationalism and other bigoted ideologies. And Bitts and I spoke about the events over the weekend and the implications of it all. And we started with the group at the center of this story, the Patriot Front white nationalist organization.
We had certainly been watching some of the chatter around Coeur d'Alene Pride in the Park leading up to this event for about the past month. Certainly, it was interesting that Patriot Front in particular decided to show up. This is a white nationalist group that formed following the deadly Unite the Right rally in 2017 in Charlottesville. And in order to do that, they broke off from the neo-Nazi organization Vanguard America. So one of Saturday's arrestees is Patriot Front's founder, Thomas Rousseau. He's someone who led Vanguard America members during Unite the Right, including James Alex Fields Jr., who's the young man who was convicted of murdering the anti-racist protester Heather Heyer.
Kate Bitts, a program manager with the Western State Center, says it shouldn't be a surprise that the Patriot Front group showed up in Idaho on Saturday. They have a history of doing things like this, and quick action by a citizen reporting suspicious behavior was crucial.
Definitely, Patriot Front and people who work with Patriot Front do have a history of organizing actions that turn violent. I think it was a big relief to everyone to see that in this case they were quickly arrested, apparently, according to the Coeur d'Alene police, on the tip of an ordinary citizen who saw 30 guys getting into the back of that U-Haul and realized that something was very wrong. So great quick action by the community and by local law enforcement in this instance to forestall something that I don't think we quite know how it could have turned out.
When you talk about the chatter and then leading to what it did on Saturday, is this different in the work you do? Is this different to actually see people show up rather than just to see hate speech online?
Certainly we are seeing a rise in homophobia and transphobia as one of the excuses for organizing, I guess you might say, on the part of bigoted groups. And we should point out that Panhandle Patriots is not Patriot Front. These are separate groups. One is locally based, whereas Patriot Front, it very much appears that only one of those 31 arrestees was actually from our region. So yes, we have seen some escalation around Pride events this year, and partly that is because we're seeing an institutional environment. You mentioned an elected official who'd been involved in encouraging some of this mobilization. We do see an institutional environment that kind of enables and encourages this view of the LGBTQ community as somehow dangerous, instead of just people living our lives and treating our community as something of an outside influence. That's really unfortunate, and I think it's incredibly important for leaders across the political spectrum to be clear on the fact that this kind of political violence and threatening, intimidating environment is bad for everyone, not just for people who want to celebrate Pride.
When you talk about the institutional factors in the state of Idaho, in 1 week we have pride flags that are very famously placed in downtown Boise. They're ripped down and they're destroyed. You have a local pastor who basically calls for the extermination of the LGBTQ community. And then we see an out-of-state group show up in Coeur d'Alene to take on a pride festival. This is all 1 week in Idaho. In your research, what type of situation in our state is allowing this to happen where it's almost being encouraged, as we talked about, by some elected officials?
Idaho, we do see as a bellwether state. Idaho often tells us where the rest of the country may be headed in terms of how anti-democracy groups are going to try to build power, but also in terms of how effectively communities are able to push back and to blunt this kind of bigoted organizing. So, the excellent work of North Idaho Pride Alliance in putting together a really broad coalition, working with local government, with law enforcement, with civil society in North Idaho to successfully put on an event that, from everything I've heard from people in Coeur d'Alene, was fun, joyful, positive. That also shows us that Idaho is a seat of standing up to this kind of bigotry.
All right, Joe, I just have to say this. She said Idaho is a bellwether state.
Yeah.
So I'd have to say, this isn't a one-off. No. This isn't happen. But if we're a bellwether state, it certainly is up to us how that bell sounds from here on out.
Yeah, we're all part of it. This isn't just for people to watch play out on television. You can stand up and face hate. It's easy to speak out against something that we all know is wrong.
Thanks, Joe. Okay, so this property tax stuff, it's that time of year and it hasn't been super easy to explain how it all works. Your property tax has a lot to do with your property value, and many have seen their value skyrocket in the last year or so. And while that number does correlate to the tax you will pay this year, it's not a direct correlation. If your property doubled in value, it makes sense to believe your property tax bill will double too. And like I said, math, not something we did very well last week when we tried to explain this, so it's all very confusing. But speaking of last week, we learned from Valley County, where even empty lots were assessed 250% higher over last year. The assessor's office told us, well, that's not the case. Not everyone seemed to believe that your property tax will follow your property value. And what he had to say about it, like this voicemail from Dennis.
I believe that you guys need to quit telling people about those taxes. That's all a bunch of hooey. I got my tax assessment, and it has gone up at least twice fold. So instead of getting on there lying to people, tell them the truth, that 3% nonsense is all baloney. So thank you very much, and I watch you every day, but you guys, that Truth Squad, what a joke. Have a great day.
All right, well, let's bring in the newest member of the Truth Squad, that is Andrew Bartline here, to see if we can clear up some of this baloney and some of this hooey. I know you reported on these assessments over the last few weeks in Canyon County. Okay, so split the difference for you here. If the property value increases, are your taxes automatically going to increase as well?
Yeah, well, this is my least favorite answer to give on anything, but it kind of depends. It really is on a case-by-case basis, Brian. Each property is impacted based on those taxes determined by the local tax districts, not the assessor's office. Now, you might remember this. Earlier this month, we profiled a woman in Nampa. The assessor's office valued her home at 36% higher than the previous year. And today, we got our hands on her annual property tax bills, I should say, dating back 5 years. So take a look at this document. We can see the annual tax bill on the bottom of the screen. It increased by more than $200 in 2019, but every year since, her property taxes have decreased from year to year. Not a lot, it's been a few bucks. But over that same span, her property appreciated by $100,000. So how can you pay less in taxes despite owning a higher property value? It all depends on those tax districts and how they budget.
What's going to happen, you know? How much more is it going to cost? How much higher are they going to go? Is it going to be better next year or worse?
Some of the larger taxing districts that have a bigger burden on somebody's tax bill would be your schools, obviously the county, the cities, some fire districts, the highway districts. Depending on what happens within those budgets can have a large impact on your tax bill.
Despite your property appreciating, you're actually not paying more in property taxes. It stayed the same. Are you surprised to see that?
I'm very surprised.
Now, over this time, the maximum homeowner exemption grew by $25,000. Her property is outside Nampa city limits, so she doesn't have to pay into the city property tax district as well. Those are two factors that are helping this property specifically, but $100,000 in increased value, yet she's paying $6 less per year. Just because your property goes up in value does not mean that you are guaranteed to pay more in taxes.
Okay, really quickly, Dennis's voicemail. The 3%, again, that's how much a budget can go increase in those taxing districts. That's by state law. The other thing he mentioned, he got his tax assessment, but he didn't. Those actually don't start to come out till tomorrow. Is that correct?
I think it's the assessment valuation that they
right,
get
and it's not even an accurate one. It's just an estimate. You said tomorrow people can look to see a guesstimate on what they might pay based on their value.
The Tax Commission will have a website that should be live tomorrow that can give people a good estimation.
Good information. Thanks, Andrew. It's the only thing that is certain in this life, that it will come to an end. We know this, although we don't like to talk about it too often, if at all. Well, there's a local group that wants to change that. They want to create an open conversation to make it easier for those who are uneasy about facing death.
I'm very much an advocate that death is a part of life. I mean, here we are in the cemetery and the acorns are falling off the trees. These leaves will all die. The squirrels will all die. We all accept that, but the same thing is true of us. You know, our culture pretty much hides death. People don't want to talk about it. I was present when my grandfather died at age 5, and I still remember every detail of that experience. It's traumatic because he died, because I had been with him shortly before, and then because we didn't talk about it in my family, and I was banished from the funeral. And I'm sure that a part of my doing this work is because in my family growing up, we didn't talk about it. Death Café is an opportunity for people to come together and to talk informally about death. Typically, we have about 4 facilitators available, and we break up into groups. So it's a discussion. We make space for everybody who wants to participate in the discussion to do so. It has no religious connection. It has no particular ethical or moral or anything connection. It's just an open opportunity for conversation. Some people may have lost a spouse or a partner or even a child recently. And some people come because they're contemplating the loss of a loved one. We had one person come several years ago who was actively dying and came to talk about his dying. He was very angry, and it was an opportunity for him to talk, and I think people really appreciated his openness and his willing to share. Sometimes people want to talk about how they want to die or what they want done with their body. There's almost always tears, and there's almost always laughter, because there's a light side and a dark side to humor around death as well. I don't know that it's really changed me, but it gives me appreciation for people's differences, people's lives, people's uniqueness, and the importance of this work. It just, you know, none of us knows when we're going to die, or in most cases, how we're going to die. I think a lot of people really do like the opportunity to be able to talk about some things, to hear other people's perspectives, and to explore some of their own feelings about it.
Dry Creek Cemetery tomorrow at 6 o'clock if you want to join the Death Cafe. I wish we had more time for comments, but we don't. We'll get to them this week. Thank you for sending them in. We'll see you tomorrow.